So now I'll give you back to Jessica to talk a little bit about the experience of college from a sensory perspective.
Thanks, Kieran. So, hi again. I'm going to talk about my experience. So, just a little bit of background information on me first. I graduated from psychology last year. I did my undergraduate, and the places on campus that I was primarily located were the Arts Block and Aris an Fiorsaigh. So it's important to say that I'm also autistic. So this is going to be my autistic experience and my sensory experience. As being autistic, I can't separate that from my sensory experience. So it'll be both of them combined. But I also just want to say that I wouldn't ever change my neurotype. I wouldn't ever not want to be autistic or change my sensory system. It's just sometimes that challenges are created and challenges happen because this world primarily is designed only for one neurotype. So I'm going to break this up. I'm going to talk about my first 2 years, and then I'm going to talk about my last 2 years. So my first 2 years were a lot more challenging because at this time I was still masking or more echoing what other people said, or just trying to camouflage and be invisible. And I wasn't really aware of all the supports or how I could be me in this new environment. I also had very little awareness of my own sensory system. I had previously done a sensory profile, but I hadn't really comprehended what it meant. So my first year was a little bit better. My first year, I stuck to one person like glue. They are wonderful, but they were wonderful then as well because they asked all the questions that I wanted to ask, and I didn't need to worry about the volume of my voice because they asked the questions. And they also seemed to experience sensory overload as well. So I had someone to sit up front with when I was in class, and I had someone to talk about with all that I was learning, which is really helpful for learning, getting to talk to people about it. But then in second year they left, and I was suddenly hit with both feeling terribly alone and also really overloaded. I would be exhausted by the time I got to college because of the rush hour traffic, or just, well, not traffic, but people traffic. And I left and came in early. If I left early to kind of miss that rush hour of all the people and came in early, then I'd be exhausted before the day was out. And then I'd be all alone when I was in there. And between classes, rather than in classes, but between classes was kind of the hardest, because it's a really odd feeling not wanting to be in a crowd because you know that it will drain you of all the energy you have, but at the same time really wanting to be a part of the crowd, because without that connection of people and friendship, college can be a really lonely experience. So that was difficult. My classes were small, which was good. There was only about 50 people in. Well, there wasn't even normally 50 people, but it was like a maximum 50 people. I don't think I would have coped with really large classes or those big lecture halls that I hear of. I don't think I would have done well with that at all. I needed to sit down the front of the class because at the back I could see all the visual of other people typing on screens and flicking to different screens and writing, and I just found it all way too overloading and distracting, and I couldn't concentrate. So I had to sit at the front, which meant that I had to be on time for class, because if I was late, I would have just been way too petrified to walk into class and walk down the front. So this meant that I had to be on time, but I wasn't very good at being on time. So some advice that I got was that if I was late, that I should just go in and then I might learn something, I might pick up something. But I knew that if I did actually sit at the back of the class, go in late and sit at the back of the class, that much visual input, it wouldn't be just that I wouldn't learn. I would know that visual input would give me so much overload that it would affect my ability to be able to learn anything for the rest of the day, and the whole rest of the day would just be gone then. So this meant that I did miss a lot of classes. Another issue that I had was asking questions. I always felt like I always had loads of questions to ask in class, but I never asked them because I could never tell what the volume of my voice was. I couldn't tell if I was shouting or if I was whispering. So that was just made asking questions impossible. And then I didn't know when you do, on the rare occasion when I did ask a question, I didn't know if the lecturer was signaling to me to talk, or if they were signaling to someone behind me. So yeah, I didn't really ask any questions in class. Another really difficult part of the day was transitions and between classes. So this is probably the most challenging. So I've already talked about the rush hour and the commute in and out from college. That was difficult. And then also I got the lift a lot. And I often kind of felt bad about getting the lift because those posters were on the wall saying, do you really need to use this lift? But for me, the stairs were just so exhausting. That awful vestibular input of moving round and round and keep going round and trying to stick to the right side of the way you have to walk on a certain side if you're going up, on a certain side if you're going down, so trying to keep to that side, and the swarms of people coming at me and people shuffling behind me because I'm going too slow and trying to get past me. And by the time I got to the top of the stairs, I would just feel exhausted and really sleepy and dizzy. And then going down was even worse because I've also got dyspraxia. So that, coupled with the disorientation of going down the stairs, meant that it led to higher chances of me falling over. So that was difficult as well. And another part of my experience at colleges was that my expectation didn't really meet with my reality. I always expected that college would be more of a social experience, or not more, but as much of a social experience as it was an educational experience. My first week of college, I joined many of the societies and planned to go to many of the groups, but I quickly found out that it was not going to be that easy at all. Most society events I knew about were in the evening times, and by the end of the day, I was just too exhausted to even nearly get on the train. I'd be falling asleep. It'd be hard to carry myself around because I'd be so exhausted from all the overload. So that just wasn't an option. And I also registered with the disability service, and the accommodations that they gave sounded great in theory, but not so much in practice. So I also have dyslexia, and I was given the accommodation of using speech to text software for my exams and study. So this was called Dragon. But to use Dragon, I needed to be in a quiet environment where I could talk. So that meant the library was out. And I didn't realize it would be so difficult to study in college because there was nowhere that I could actually use Dragon to study. And if I wanted to study, I had to go home. And I lived probably about an hour away. So it really didn't work practically in college because if I wanted to study, I had to go home. But one unexpected thing that was really good about Dragon was for exams. So I didn't really use Dragon apart from in exams. I used it sometimes to do the odd assignment as long as I was home, but I had to be home to use it. But anyway, because I used it in exams, it meant that I got a separate room for my exams, which was really good for my sensory system. Because I find I work and I concentrate much better when I can stim and where I can bring sensory supports and I can move around and I'm not distracted by all the little noises other people make. And it was only me, so I could go. I always made sure I went in early so I could kind of arrange the room how I like, because I find like if there's people moving behind me, then that can be as off-putting as things going on in front of me, because I can kind of feel it even though I can't see it. And then I could also just have the chair where I wanted it and set all that up. And then there was only me and the invigilator, so I could like request that the invigilator doesn't make an annoying noise or doesn't make eating noises. So that was good too. I also really wanted to be a part of the college community. I wanted to get involved in sports or walking. I was in psychology, so I was in Shane O'Mara's classes, so I was learning all about the amazing benefits of walking and exercise. And I didn't do any of that, so it was really important that I started doing that. So I used to get those emails saying that, oh, we're doing some sort of walking challenges and sign up to do it and get involved in it. And I realized that I'm actually quite competitive. I never realized that before, but I was always sad to realize that those emails from, I think, TCD Sport were there for the walking challenge. They always required you to be on a team, and sure, I didn't have anyone to be on a team with, so that left that option out. I couldn't do that. And then So I was trying to think of other things that I could do. And I always have to take in the sensory environment when I think about what I can do. Like team sports wouldn't really work because I'd be too terrified of the ball or something unexpected happening, or people noises can be really exhausting too. But one thing I really love is swimming, and there's one thing that I really have missed most in lockdown. And I just love the feeling of being in water and floating and moving through water. It's calming and relaxing, but then it gives you lots of energy as well. It's just like my really happy place. So I thought that even though there's lots of steps involved to going swimming, and often it's the steps to an exercise that's the most exhausting rather than the actual exercise. So I thought that I could maybe counteract that, or that the good feeling of swimming would counteract the steps to swimming. And so I set things up like I got a locker in the sports center, because I thought if I have all my stuff in one place, then that will make it easier, and for me to, it'll cut down some of the steps, like bringing extra stuff with me to college and carrying around them all day. So I got that. But I remember my first time, my first time going to the TCD pool. And I don't think I even managed to even get into the pool. The whole thing was just really a sensory nightmare. There was the loud lobby trying to figure out where to go. And even though I'd been there before, I was still completely confused about where to go. And the scratching noise of the things you put on your feet, the blue things you put over your shoes, and then the echoing walls, and the open plan changing area, and the movement and the noise and the colors and the splashes and the open showers. I felt like I was going to be sick, and I just got out of there as quickly as I could. And the only time I ever went back was to get my stuff out of my locker at the end of term at exam time, when it was a lot quieter. So that just didn't work at all. So I know my first half of this has been a bit negative, but I want to talk now about how things got better, because they did get better, and my last 2 years were great in college. So one of the things that really helped was getting to know my sensory system. I always thought that I was primarily a sensory avoider or a sensory sensor. I never really thought I was a sensory seeker, but by getting to know my sensory system, I figured out that I was a sensory seeker. And not just that, but I always thought sensory seeking was something you did if you didn't have enough sensory stimuli. But I discovered with the work with the OT tip, I found out that the sensory seeking, that being a sensory seeker meant that it could help you reduce you when you'd gone past overload. And it wasn't just for people that didn't have enough, but sensory seeking, as long as it was the right type of sensory input, could really help bring you down. So yeah, with discovering I was a sensory seeker, and I did that to really discovering OT supports and how my sensory system really interacted with everything. So I had OT supports from the start, but like it was in really understanding what OT supports were and how they could help me. That really made a big difference. So I realized that my sensory system interacts with everything. It interacts with my mental health, with my energy, with my sleep, my hunger. So when my sensory system's not right, then it can affect everything else. Or if something else is not right, often it's because my sensory system's not right. So that was major. And another thing that happened in third year is I started going to the Managing TCD with ASD Group, and this was the best thing to discover. I loved that group. Not really the content or the name or the learning social skills, because at this point I was starting to realize that I don't need to learn the right way to be human. I'm quite happy being me and being my own neurodiverse way, so I wasn't really interested in learning social skills at all. I think actually I was a bit angry about that, but that was just it at the time. But the group, it was the authentic connections and the chats, and finally meeting people on campus with a similar experience to me. I'm not sure how college, I don't think, like, it really made a big difference for college for me. I also learned lots of sensory strategies that I found out from others in the group. I discovered that from other people in the group, I discovered that there were society activities in the daytime. like in the lit sock, the near SU, that they have like a really sensory friendly reading and social space that you can go to. You don't really have to even talk about literature. So that was great to find out. And then they also have a sensory friendly games and social space hidden in the Hamilton. So these were great to find out, because it was somewhere where I could go finally when I was burnt out in the middle of the day, and to recover with a break from sensory, but still getting that really important little bit of social contact. Not where I had to mask or pretend, but just being with others without being alone in a crowd. And then I'd have the energy to finish the rest of the day. So that was really important. Another thing that made a big difference was having the authentic personal growth and getting to know myself better. As I said before, I was beginning to stop that kind of self-eroding masking stuff. And I was giving up all that practicing social skill stuff that really just made things a lot worse. And I was really starting to be me and be happy with who I am. And I was really enjoying it, and actually getting what was inside me out. Because I always had a strong sense of self inside, but I could never really get it out into the world. But I was starting to do that now. So I could now take the lift without feeling bad, because I knew that I really did need to use the lift, because if I didn't use the lift, I'd just be exhausted for the whole day. So I could read that sign now and say, I do actually really need to use the lift. Or I could wear my headphones in class, because before I'd gotten advice that said maybe I shouldn't wear my headphones in class because I would stand out and I'd be different. But I was now okay with standing out and being different, and I could explain to people that I'm wearing these headphones, and it's not that I'm doing it to block you out. Actually, I can hear you, and I can hear the conversation a lot better when I've got them on. I just can't hear all the background noise. So yeah, explaining it was really helpful. I also got more involved in programs like mentoring and the Intel Awards, where I could do things like stand up and give speeches, like I'm doing now. I could tell people about why I had my headphones on, or why I sometimes wore hats and sunglasses, and I could make my learning experience really real, and people are a lot more accepting when they kind of understand what's going on. So that was good. And that gave me the chance to actually really develop my real sense of self in the world, because before it was only, as I said, inside me, and now I could do it in the world. So that was great. So I was done with changing who I was or hiding to fit into the world, and that didn't work. So I was sticking out now and being okay with sticking out. And when you're okay with sticking out, it's kind of like you don't really stick out at all. And then my third year group project was really stressful. It was a good learning experience, but it was really stressful as well. But it did give me that kind of needed social contact that I hadn't had before. And also I got to explore my favorite subject. And then fourth year, I actually missed the group project interactions. But I loved my final year project as well. Again, my favorite subject, which was exploring autistic perception, sensory sensitivity, uncertainty, and the environment. So yeah, it was my last 2 years were really good. So I'll hand you back to Kieran now. That's just a bit on my experience.
Thanks a million, Jessica. So I suppose just taking what Jessica has been talking about there, of her experience broadly of student life, and not just about academics being a major part of it, but student life in general. And that's very much what we look at when we talk about this. We're not just talking about environments, we're talking about the experiences within those environments. We're talking about how this helps or may cut across students wanting to engage in things. So something that kind of strikes in what Jessica has said there, it wasn't just about being in the environment in that moment, but it was also about, if you had to be in that different spaces or do different things over the course of a whole day, that the impact that that had by the end of the day, by not being able to, being too exhausted or not being able to engage with things that she wanted to engage in the end of the day. So this whole experience, I think, is a key takeaway, I would say, from today's webinar, is not just to think of environments, but think about the whole experience of this from a sensory perspective. So I suppose to add more to that, we did a survey in May 2019 of 150 students who are registered with the Disability Service on their sensory experiences within learning spaces within college. And I suppose echoing some elements of what Jessica said there, that 68% reported that there was no quiet space on campus that they could easily access if feeling overwhelmed. And 50% commented they would go home or leave campus, which I suppose have big implications for engagement in college and student life. If you think about societies or events happening in the evening, thinking about a timetable where a student may have a lecture at 10 in the morning and 4 o'clock in the evening, that would generally stay around college and go into libraries, that if somebody was feeling overwhelmed, that 50% would say they would go home. That 93% would use a quiet space if it was available within the library. And I suppose this is one, to think about, and one that we're placing a lot of focus on is the library. That I suppose you might think the library is one of the quieter places within college, but when one is trying to really focus in and concentrate, and there is not an underlying amount of noise or a large amount of noise, small unexpected noises such as coughing or clicking of a pen or moving of chairs, these unexpected noises can actually be quite overwhelming when you're trying to focus in. So you'll hear a lot of students who are trying to block out those type of noises rather than necessarily huge amounts of noise from crowds or traffic. 49% of students reported difficulty with acoustics in the library, again, and then 41% acoustics within lectures. And again, if you think about what's happening in a lecture, you're trying to focus in on one person speaking. But if you're trying to filter out a lot of other background noise from an acoustic perspective, or as Jessica said, from a visual perspective, trying to filter out everything that's happening, if she's sitting at the back of a lecture, but also trying to focus in on what's happening in the lecture, it's those conflicting stimuli can be very challenging. But not to focus so much just on sensitivity, that people's sensory preferences and sensory systems are complex, as we all are. And it isn't about just trying to avoid sensation or avoid noise. So for instance, in this question we had in the survey, what noise enables you to concentrate? It isn't all about silence. It isn't all about removing yourself from places. People look for very specific types of sensations. So you can hear here the connection to nature, birdsong, or students using low hums or white noise could be something that really supported their engagement and their concentration. Again, sort of natural sounds of life, as the student says, rain. But some students then would use these kind of white noise or the hums to block out the unexpected noises they couldn't control. So for instance, air vents or typing, these kind of things. So I suppose it's just how students use sensation, and not just to think of it about creating quiet spaces and in the absence of sensory stimuli. But students often will look for different types of it. And that again is something that underpins the work we're looking to do.